This is the Speaking of Writers podcast. I'm Steve Richards. The book is The Man Made of Smoke, the author, Alex North. It is the latest gripping serial killer thriller from the New York Times bestselling author. Dan Garvey's life has been haunted by the crime he witnessed as a child, narrowly escaping an encounter with a notorious serial killer. He has dedicated his life since to becoming a criminal profiler, eager to seek justice for innocent victims. So when his father passes away under suspicious circumstances, Dan revisits his small island community, determined to uncover the truth about his death. Is it possible that the monster he remembers from his childhood nightmares has returned after all these years? With his signature shock and suspense, Alex North brings us this book, The Man Made of Smoke, in turn emotional, introspective, and utterly terrifying. This is a story of fathers and sons, shadows and secrets, and the fight we all face to escape the trauma of the past. Alex North is the internationally best-selling author of The Angel Maker, The Whisper Man, and The Shadows. He lives in Leeds, England with his wife and son, and is a British crime writer who was previously published under another name. I'm happy to have for the first time Alex North join me here on the Speaking of Writers podcast. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. And that's such a lovely introduction. I couldn't
Thank you.
do better myself. Thank you. I really appreciate it. So it's nice to talk to you.
Well, it's nice to have you here. So, where did the idea for this story come from? And by the way, it hooks you in right from the start.
Well, I appreciate that too. Thank you very much. I mean, in terms of the initial idea, it's very I have to be careful what I say because the initial idea is actually the MO for the serial killer in the book, but you don't find that out until about halfway through. Um, and I spent a lot of time with that in the back of my head, thinking, how can I make that work as a story? And I couldn't do it. Years and years and years. It was always there, just kind of like irritating me, thinking, how can I make that work as a crime story? Because there are different ways you can go with it without giving anything away. But it was only when I wrote the beginning, completely separately, I think, I just came up with the idea of the beginning, which is Dan as a child, he encounters a serial killer at a service station and fails to do what he thinks that he should do to help the victim. And there are then repercussions from that throughout his life. And when I wrote that, with no real idea of where it was going to go, it was like, oh, that fits in with that idea. Because you always have these ideas in the back of your head that are bubbling away that you can't figure out what to do with. And when I wrote that initial scene at the service station, and I'm glad that hooked you in, um, that was when I thought, well, I can make this idea work with that. And then obviously you write and write and write and redraft and redraft and redraft. And eventually it came together. So the initial idea I can't talk about because it's kind of a spoiler for the book, but that was what was always in the back of my mind. And then the initial scene is how I made it work.
Yeah, my heart was racing right from the opening pages of this book, and yours
Oh,
will
I
too,
appreciate
trust
that.
me. So, Dan Garvey, the character, how did you develop
Mm.
Dan?
I mean, I suppose it was basically just um, thinking about that initial encounter and then sort of thinking about what kind of person that young boy would grow up to be. He encounters, as we've said, he encounters a serial killer in the initial pages as a 12, 13-year-old-ish. He's on the cusp of puberty. He doesn't really, he's not quite capable of intervening in the situation, but he also feels like he should do. And so then it's a case of thinking, what kind of person would that child grow up to be? And Dan grows up to be somebody who is extremely haunted by that decision. Um, Decision is the wrong word. Haunted by what he did and didn't do, and everything like that. It casts a shadow over his teenage years, and so then it's a case of thinking, well, what kind of man would grow up from that position? And Dan is somebody who um, he wants to kind of excuse himself and he wants to kind of understand what happened. And so he becomes a criminal psychologist. He wants to understand that there's no such thing as monsters. You know, there are these explanations for why people do different things. And he becomes a criminal psychologist, I guess, to understand that. And that was always my thinking was how does this child who's gone through this extreme thing, what happens to him next? How does he deal with life? How does he begin to process things? How does he cope with what he did and didn't do? And he kind of gradually developed over time, as I think over different drafts. But it was all, yeah, yeah. So he becomes a criminal psychologist. He wants to understand this monster that haunts him and how it's not really a monster, it's human, um, and process that in a way. But at the same time, he's kind of processing his own guilt, his own trauma.
Alex, the themes in this book, trauma, fathers and sons, shadows, and secrets. What was the primary
Mm.
challenge in writing this novel for you?
That's an interesting question because I mean there are loads and loads of different challenges when you're writing stuff. Um, one of the main challenges was getting the timeline right because it's a story that happened. It begins 20 odd years before the main driving plot of the book, and there are various flashbacks and there are different investigations going on at slightly different times. So it was all the most difficult bit as a writer, the technical bit was getting all that information in the right order so that it doesn't confuse the reader and it all just flows naturally from one bit to the next without repeating yourself, without revealing anything too soon. It was a very technical challenge as a writer, I suppose, to do that. And just in a boring way, getting the dates right.
Mm.
Um, it's kind of amazing because I went over the book so many times and it was copy edited so many times, edited, copy edited, proofread, and I think there is still an error in the dates in the finished book that only I will notice, but I need to, to change it. So when you have a book that is set over 20 years or something, you're inevitably going to make little mistakes like that, and you need to, and everything has a knock-on effect. So that was the principal sort of technical challenge of it. But then there is also just the challenge of you're writing numerous drafts and you need to get the characters right, you need to get the balance of emotion right and the tension right here and there without revealing too much too soon and revealing everything at the right place to hopefully create the effect that you want.
What's the story behind you becoming a writer and why crime is a genre for you?
Okay, so a writer is all that I have ever wanted to be. I mean, I've told this story before, but it's like when I was a kid, my mum would we were quite a poor household. We didn't have very much money. We didn't have much. We couldn't afford very much. But my mum would always say there's always money for reading, you know, and we
Mm.
relied on the local library, and she would take sheets of A4 paper and fold them in half in a bunch, and then sew the edges and say, you know, write a story for me. And I would fill this stuff when I was like 6 or 7, 8, 9, and I would do choose your own adventure books to begin with. But then as I got older, I was always writing stories, and I remember being in I think I was 11 years old at school and doing a maths exam, and I knew that I'd messed it up at the end. But I thought to myself, it's okay because you're going to be a writer. You don't need to do this. You're going to be a writer. That's what you're going to do. And so I've always written from a very young age. I was encouraged to. I was encouraged to love stories, reading, writing. Um, I think I finished my first novel in inverted commas when I was 17 or
Mm.
18. It was terrible, obviously, because at 17 or 18 you don't know anything. But I submitted it and got rejected. And I think I submitted 6 or 7 novels over the next 8 or 9 years, however long. And they all got rejected too, but it was always writing. That was all I wanted to do. And I started off kind of writing horror. And then eventually somebody just took me on. An agent took me on, and then a publisher took me on. And there was something in the book that was slightly crime related. And so they published it as crime. And so at that point, it's like, you're a crime writer. And I was like, I think I'm a horror writer, really. I really
Mm.
love horror and science fiction and all that kind of stuff. But it's like, no, you're a crime writer now. And then I realized that you can do pretty much everything with crime. Crime is such a broad genre. You know, you can pull anything that you want to talk about into crime. So at that point, it was like, yeah, I'm going to write crime. And this was not as Alex North. This was under my original name of Steve Mosby. So I wrote 10 books as Steve Mosby. They were all kind of, they started off a little bit weird, but then they became just straightforward crime with dark elements in them. And then I become Alex North, which is the same again, essentially. slightly different parts, but more or less the same. So it's just always been a passion of mine, writing. It's all I've ever wanted to do. And I'm, really happy that I get to do it these days.
So you always knew that you were a pretty good storyteller.
I don't think I'm a very good storyteller now. I think I just edit a lot. Um, I don't know. No, I don't know if I'm a very good storyteller, but I know that that's what I want to do. I know that's my passion. I know that I really want to produce something that um, kind of makes somebody feel something. I want to tell stories to people. That's what I want to do. And I love writing, and yeah, that's how I want to make my living, and that's how I want to spend my life. And yeah, I always knew that. I always knew that I wanted to write from a very, very early age. Um, there was nothing when I was at school and going to university. It wasn't like there was any other vocation that I was aiming for. It was always in the service of I want to write for a living if I can, you know.
Yeah. What are the ingredients that make up a great crime novel?
Oh man, that's a really, really difficult question to answer, as I'm sure you probably interviewed loads of people who have all different answers to that. I mean, I think you need great characters. You need, yeah, I mean, great, you need characters that you care about. I think you need, for a crime novel, you need peril, you need mystery, but the question of why, I think, is crucial. So for a reader picking up the book, you always want them to have a reason to read on. And so you want unanswered questions, basically. And then you want some more questions, and you want to provide some answers along the way. And you just want to keep them moving through the book. You have to capture somebody's attention. You want them to want to continue with what's because there's so much competition for people's attention these days as
Yeah.
well, especially. But in a good thriller, I think you just want, yeah, great characters, good story, lots of questions, and a reason to keep reading, I
Yeah,
think.
dropping
It's a
those
really basic.
the breadcrumbs,
So
right? To keep them turning the page.
the breadcrumbs to keep people turning the page. Yeah, I mean that's plot related as well. But I tell you what, I'll read a book where it's just like the voice is good as
Mm.
well. It's like the voice has something to tell you, and it's like, yeah, okay, I'm in for this. I'm gonna sit and read this because this reads confidently, and it's like there's something going on here. You need that kind of um yeah, that desire to keep turning the pages. You need the kind of confidence that the writer has something to say and it's worth getting to the end of the book to get there. Whether that's plot related or character related or, just prose related or theme related or anything. You want to feel like the writer is in charge and it's like, strap in, come with me, it's worth it, you
Mm.
know? And, when you get that, it's gold.
Alex, when you're writing an emotionally draining scene, how do you get in the mood?
It's um it's not that hard really, actually. It's a really technical exercise, I think, for me most of the time. Um, and emotionally, I feel quite emotionally drained sometimes when I'm writing stuff, but for the most part, that's the ideas behind it that you're thinking about. When it comes to actually putting it into words, it's extremely technical, I think, to do that. It's a craft exercise to pick the language that you're using, put stuff in a certain order, arrange it in a certain way for effect in terms of not just the language, but the events of the chapter or the events of the scene or the events of the whole book. You're building to those kind of climaxes. And so in that sense, I don't prepare for it or I don't get affected by it. It's a technical exercise, I think. It's like doing a magic trick or something like that. You prepare everything so that the effect unfolds at the right point. And that's, you have to think about how to do that rather than the emotion that the reader will be feeling at that point. That's a separate thing. You're planning for that, but you're not feeling it yourself. So
So it's
yeah,
more,
it's just
yeah, more technical for you. You don't get fully emotionally invested in it.
not fully emotionally invested in it when I'm writing it as such. But I look back on The Man Made of Smoke now. I mean, emotion is very important to me, even though I say that I'm kind of doing it unemotionally when I'm writing, that it's just a craft thing. The emotion is very, very important to me. So I can look back now, thankfully, at the Man Made of Smoke. There's the ending of the Man Made of Smoke. I love it. You know, it's really, really emotional, and actually it affects me when I read it or
Mm,
look back on it, and I think, "Oh, okay, that kind of works." But in order to make that happen on the page, you have to be quite sort of laser focused on doing this, and this in the right order. And then when you read it, it's like, I don't see the this, and this. I just, it works. And,
mm.
you know,
What's the one book that made you want to become a writer
that's
or
harsh to put it down to
or
one,
author?
but I mean, there'd probably be different ones over time. Like I said, my parents always encouraged me to read. So as
Mm,
when I was growing up, Diana Wynne Jones, as she was a fantasy author who wrote kind of books for kids, but they're really, really good. They're really so there was a book of hers called The Power of Three, by Diana Wynne Jones, which is a huge influence on The Whisper Man in a kind of very understated way. You wouldn't, if you didn't know, you wouldn't know, but it is. So Diana Wynne Jones, and in the sense, I suppose, any book that you read as a kid, or all the books that you read as a kid that get you sort of impassioned about reading, they're all important. You know, anything that kind of keeps you hooked and makes you excited about reading draws you in. So Diana Wynne Jones definitely. And then when I was getting slightly older, obviously people like Stephen King, Dean Koontz, all the kind of Richard Layman, Ramsey Campbell in the UK, Clive Barker, these horror writers. And then when I was slightly older, people like Michael Marshall Smith and Graham Joyce, who were doing this thing where they were mixing horror into literary fiction almost, and just doing kind of slipstream stuff. A guy called Christopher Priest. Anything that kind of was doing cross-genre stuff, I was loving, and it was helping to show me what I could do. You know, that you didn't just have to do A, B, C, D, E in terms of the meat and potatoes of a particular genre. You could bring other elements in and throw it around and play with voice and play with different things. But we're all a product of everything we read. So
Yeah.
it's like it's really tricky to say. I say Diana Wynne Jones, but I mean I read C.S. Lewis as a kid a lot. 'Cause that's what your parents give you. But I
Yeah.
wouldn't say he was a huge influence on me or anything like that. But anything that gets you just passionate and engaged about reading, I think is really good and it stays with you.
What genres do you especially enjoy reading now?
Anything and everything. I'm not the world's best reader at the moment. Um, it's something every year my New Year's resolution is I need to read more. And I think social media has kind of like completely like made my reading experience very different these days. It's so hard to concentrate on stuff. I will read anything where I think it's the voice. You know, when you pick something up and it feels like the person is in charge and is like, "Come with me, I'm going to tell you a story." Um, I'll follow anything like that, but it's not a particular genre. I'll read crime stuff, I'll read SF, I'll read horror, literary, whatever. I mean, recent books that I've read, I haven't been too many, but I loved Sarah Pinborough's that We Live Here Now. I can't remember what the title is off the top of my head, but it's recently released. I think she's great. Tariq Ashkenani, The Midnight King. I love that. Stuff that is just, yeah, stuff where you pick it up and you read it and it's like, yeah, I want to keep reading more because I
Mm.
like the style of the writing. I like where it's going, just the confidence of it. That's what I go for.
And Alex, speaking of social media, do you hear from readers much and interact with them?
No, yeah, not as much as I probably should. I mean, I was on Twitter for a long time, but I'm not on Twitter anymore, or X or whatever it's called these days. So I'm not on that. I have an Instagram account that I use intermittently, but I'm not that great at keeping up with it. And I'm on Blue Sky, and I'm on Facebook under my own name. Um, it's if people want to get in touch with me, they can, and I will generally try my best to respond to everybody. Instagram, I guess, is the main one where I'm easily found, but I'm very bad at keeping up with people on that. But
Mm.
I try my best. I read everything. and I really like interacting with readers. But it's also slightly complicated because obviously Alex North isn't my own name. So I have social media accounts under my own name that people don't necessarily know about. But
And what is next?
I love hearing from readers. Sorry, go on.
What is next for you and your writing?
I am working on a new book at the moment and have been for some time. I planned it all out and I've been writing for a bit now. I don't have too much yet, but I'm fairly confident that it's a book. And this is always the way for me. I have to write my way into something. I make plans and then it's like God laughs at your plans kind of thing. So I make a plan for a book and I try and write it. And then at the end of it, I figure out what I should have written all along. And then there's numerous edits and all that kind of stuff. But I've got an idea and I'm working through it. So I am, yeah, I'm working on a new book at the moment.
All right. Well, for this summer, you can enjoy this one, The Man Made of Smoke, the new one from Alex North. It is out now. Alex, thank you so much for joining me.
No, honestly, thank you for having me. I appreciate it very much, Steve. Thanks.
Thank you. And thanks for watching. This is the Speaking of Writers podcast. Make sure you subscribe, like, comment. I'm Steve Richards.